This is Terry White, author of the Better Minneapolis newsletter and podcast host. I'd like to invite you to become a paid subscriber. You'll gain access to the archive, exclusive live chats, and happy hours. Most importantly, you'll be supporting this reader-supported effort to bring news and commentary focused on Minneapolis to a broader audience. Thank you for listening to today's interview. Hi, today I'm with Dr. DeWayne Davis, who is running for mayor.
Yes.
How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me for this conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, great. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself for those of you out there who may not have heard of you, and just a bit of your background and why you've chosen to run for mayor.
Yes, thank you. My name is DeWayne Davis. I am the 15th and youngest child of a minister and a kindergarten teacher, kindergarten Head Start teacher, who grew up in the Mississippi Delta. For those who don't know, the Mississippi Delta is probably arguably the poorest region of Mississippi and has historically been a place with wide disparities. But uh, one of the great fortunes of my life is to be born to very remarkable parents who really fought to give us an opportunity, sent every one of their children to college, made sure that we had a chance at a life that they fought so very hard to give us. And so they poured so deeply into me, such that I left home when I was, right after my high school graduation. The night of my high school graduation, I was sent off to Washington, D.C. to start going to Howard University. And I spent, got my bachelor's degree at Howard, got my graduate degree at the University of Maryland at College Park, and then eventually got my seminary degree in Wesley Seminary in Washington, D.C. So I spent 20 years in Washington, D.C. working in politics. Uh, and then ministry called, and that's how I ended up in Minneapolis. And when I got to Minneapolis, one of the things that I did right away, we moved to North Minneapolis about 12 years ago, and I just immersed myself in my neighborhood. The first thing that I did was I chose to go to North Point Clinic and begin to experience the disparities, begin to see things that I thought I needed to address. And I often say, the most powerful thing, the experience of Minneapolis for me was I had heard about this city so many times. I had visited before we moved here, and I heard about it being the most walkable city, the most livable city, the city with the greatest quality of life, the most progressive oasis in the Midwest. And I found all of those things to be true. But I also discovered that they were not true for everyone. And that's how I began to get engaged. I'm running for mayor, though, because when George Floyd was murdered, I did what I did when Jamar Clark was murdered. When Jamar Clark was murdered, I went out and Jamar Clark was killed about 3 blocks from where I live here in North Minneapolis. And I went to the precinct when it got occupied and just began to talk to people. And then I reached out to Mayor Betsy Hodges to have conversation about what was going on the ground and to really try to be a part of how do we build community around a trauma and a tragedy. I made the same offer to Mayor Fry when George Floyd was murdered, but what I've since seen is that the city appears to be stuck and our mayor seems to be out of his depth. And it has, I think, in so many ways, I see that in other parts of the city enterprise. And we deserve better. We need to get moving. We need to get unstuck. And I just think that this is a moment, this is a moral moment, this is a mission moment, and I'm going to offer everything I have to make sure that we can be the city I know that we can be. So sorry for so long, Terry, but I just had to get that all out.
Well, we'll get into some of the details of that
Yeah.
in a minute here. I want to confirm, so you are going for the DFL endorsement. You'll be at the convention, is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay, and then I saw recently that you ended your time, I guess, at Plymouth. I mean, I guess as the minister there. Is
Yes.
that right? Yeah.
That is correct. I tendered my resignation last month, largely because as much as I loved being at Plymouth, and I loved Plymouth, actually, just afforded me an opportunity to be my most academically and ministerially creative in my entire life. Um, in some sense, I think there's a moment where you have to decide what needs to be the priority. Plymouth Church is a very powerful, energetic, justice-oriented church, and it's going to continue to be that. Um, right now, I thought it's best to put all of my energies into this campaign, especially uh, given how I've met so many people in this city who know that we have an opportunity to get moving again. And I thought, right now, that should be the priority for me. My skill, will, and energy should be focused on doing that. And so, after much discernment and conversations with the deacons and members of the church who I think were really heartbroken that I was moving on. I just felt that this is the part of my time this is the part of my life that needs energy and time, especially given the illiberal and autocratic turn our country is taking.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to, I guess raise too much grief within you, but I was sorry to hear your mother died. I know
Yeah.
you took a hiatus from the campaign, which is completely understandable. So I'm sorry for your loss. One of the questions that I have is just I'm wondering if there's you kind of touched on it in your introduction, but are there certain values or ideals that your mother instilled that you see coming out in you for this campaign? I don't know if any of your other family members were ever politically active or if she was.
Yeah. That is a wonderful question because um, when I when we decided that I needed to just really focus on going home and being with family and saying farewell to our mother, I did a couple of things. I'm so grateful to my campaign manager Andrew Verdon, who said, "Look, put your focus there. We can put out a statement that you just don't be thinking about this." And I'm so grateful that he suggested that. And I did another thing that was very important. I decided to drive home because I wanted to spend time thinking and reflecting and actually thinking about, you know, how to move forward. What could I do? But here's the important thing, Terry. When I got there, and what was so powerful to me, two things really just struck me. The first was I got home and I have so many people in my family. There's not much for me to do other than be a part of some of the planning. But I have so many siblings and there's so many people. So there was a time where I just had time to reflect, and I was drawn to places that have played a part in my life in sort of a historical sense. So I visited the grave of Fannie Lou Hamer, who my mom worked with on the Head Start program. I went to the Emmett Till memorials, and I was drawn to it. No one said, my husband, no one said, oh, we should go visit those things. But when we were just sitting there, I thought I need to go and just touch the ground in some sense. The second thing, and I did that, and it was so powerful. I felt like, how are you going to contribute to justice and liberation? What is the call upon you right now? And so that was very powerful. But the second thing that happened, and I knew the outlines of the story of my mother's life, but I was born in the 1970s, so I didn't see a lot of what she did. But there were so many people who in their testimonials about her talked about how determined and motivated she was to do good work, to do justice work. They talked about, the seeing this woman with 15 children, and they kept using the word like, and it's ironic, or it's a contradiction. A woman with 15 children, but they were saying this was the most independent woman they had ever met.
Oh,
That
that's
she was,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, just undaunted and determined to do work for the church and the community. And when I learned she had died on June 8th, my first prayer was, it was a prayer that comes right out of the Bible. But I said, I prayed for a double portion of her spirit.
Hmm.
And when I heard those testimonials about her, the thought ran in my mind that you still have a chance to bring to bear your skill, will, and energy to do good work in your city. You still have an opportunity to contribute in a powerful way. And so, uh, on the drive back, I start getting on the phone and saying, I want to go forward. I want us to do this. I want to get back to work, because, again, I think Minneapolis is uniquely situated to stand against the forces of autocracy and liberalism, and it has an opportunity to address our pressing challenges today. And so I want to do everything I can to be a constructive agent of that work, and this is the place to do it right now.
So let's touch on some of those challenges. How would you define the top three priorities of your campaign?
The top three, and I want to umbrella that with, I think, something that would touch on all three. Um, I think for me, I'm running a values campaign, and the values that underlie that will be things like, dignity and cooperation and governing. I think our leadership, more specifically, the mayor, has not had those has not led with those values. How do you collaborate? How do you make governing effective as far as it's in your power to do so? How do you be motivated by making sure that everybody in our city is seen, heard, and responded to? So those are the values. The priorities that those values are going to I'm going to bring to bear those values on. We have an affordable housing crisis. We have a decreasing tax base, largely because we haven't we haven't supported and built a broader neighborhood based economy that is not just solely relying on downtown to be the heart and push for our city. And then we are under a court enforceable settlement agreement. So we have a lot of issues around community safety that needs our attention. So those are the really three big priorities, I think, that create the challenge we have here. And you can see the tentacles of that challenge. That affordable housing crisis, one of the tentacles of that is the encampment crisis. The one of the tentacles of not building a broad-based economy that stretches out throughout the city is that then we end up relying either on the commercial tax base downtown, or if that starts to falter, then we go to property tax and we start overburdening our residents. And the tentacles of this of the community safety is that we have what you've been seeing with the violence interrupter program. We are not sure that we're getting what we are investing in, and it doesn't seem to make us, or we can't really tell if it's making us safer or what's creating it. But we need to get our hands on those things so you can see the impact of what happens when we are not focused on those issues in a real systematic way and dealing with them. And I think we've got to.
So I want to just kind of go through those a little bit more.
Mhm.
So you framed them in sort of a values-based discussion of dignity, cooperation. What about you? Do you feel like it demonstrates that you have that sort of ability to make that happen?
Well, it starts with this that dignity and collaboration. The first part of that is remembering when you're in the business of politics that everything we do, every act, commission or omission, it lands on living, breathing people. If you're going to govern responsibly and accountably, you have to remember, especially when you get into tit for tat with the city council, whether you're trying to carry water for an interest or stakeholder that's really politically generous to you, you still have to be called back to the reality that the things that you do in this position, it lands on living, breathing people. That's the first thing, and that's why I think we've had such a very venal and capricious response to encampments, because I think you forget that there are some people, humanity, that is being touched by that, and you've got to keep that in mind. But governing, or where I see,
And I just want to
yeah,
ask one thing there. You know, that very people-centered approach, I definitely appreciate. And I was looking at some of your bio, and you were involved in the Poor People's Campaign, is that
yes,
right?
that's right, yes.
So I'm just curious, do you feel like that work has kind of helped shape what you were just saying in terms of
Oh,
um,
absolutely, Terry. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you one example of that. In preparation for ministry, we of course, my concentration in seminary was preaching in urban ministry. And one of the things that was very sort of, I really engaged as praxis is being close to the ground where people actually live, because that's where you begin to understand the stories, and you begin to understand where people are coming from. And so the Poor People's Campaign is an extension of that. All of that has been about really trying to understand, how do you bring to bear. And again, that actually goes back to one of the most powerful part of working on Capitol Hill that I always thought was so powerful in my work, is hearing the stories of people who come to tell you what's going on. I know
mhm,
some people, it seems like, wrote to people when they hear even a president or a member of Congress tell you that story. But those are real stories. Those are people that we've actually met. And so, one of the things when I was making that transition from politics to ministry, I was always worried that I wasn't going to keep that connection. And what I discovered, which was so powerful, was that it was the same thing, that you keep those stories. So when I moved to Minneapolis to become a minister, I ran headlong into it. I had no idea at the time that Minneapolis had the largest per capita number of people in recovery, centers for recovery. And so when I got to All God's Children, my first month there, I was officiating at funerals for people who had OD'd,
mhm.
and holding the grief of friends and family in a very powerful way. And it hit me right then and there that that's exactly why I made the offer to Mayor Hodges at the time, that I'm here because
Yeah.
we're encountering this stuff right on the ground. We really are. Um, and so the values part of it also is about collaboration. One of the things too is, one of the things that's been very powerful to me is finding that, coming in contact with the humility of things. I have said over and over again to people at church and people in this campaign, I am not an answer man. I will try to give some answers. But what I want to be is a person who partners with the people who are affected by what's going on, to not only just hear the stories and say I'm carrying it, but no, be a part of the constructive conversation about how do we help people live their best lives? How do we give them to be a part of, to participate in a part of the city that others take for granted? How do they get to have their aspirations realized?
Yeah.
And that takes working together. That takes not only just hearing, but really being a part of that collaborative way of doing things. And that too is what's so powerful about the mayor's office. We get to, by the privilege and honor of holding that position, you already have an opportunity to open the door, and that's even with the city council. You know,
Right.
you go to them. Of course, you're going to disagree. Of course, smart, talented, driven people are going to come at things from a different angle. But the first thing we've got to do is respect each other enough to build trust so that when we do disagree, we don't turn each other into permanent enemies. We disagree, and then we shake off. If I lose, shake off the disappointment of the loss, and then gird myself up for the next thing that we actually might be able to work on together. Uh,
Well, one of those things that is very difficult to work on together that people have been talking about in the city for 10 years is another one of your planks as is affordable housing, of
yeah.
course. And I wonder, I mean, we have the 2040 plan. We
Yes.
have some pretty generous zoning laws, a lot
Yeah.
more than other places in the country. But there are a lot of obstacles that I'm not sure city officials can impact. Things like cost of construction and interest rates and
Yeah.
things like that. I mean, I've read how some developers say there's just no way to build affordable housing without government assistance. And it's obviously very unclear what money is going to be coming from the federal government now. So that's a tough problem. How do you see that moving forward?
It is a tough problem, and here are a couple of things that I think we can begin to put in place and to help us sort of, I think, certainly prepare ourselves for a way of dealing with this crisis in this way. It is true. The cost of construction, the cost of development is high. And some of that is it's because we have not been we've been relying on certain types of construction, certain types of development, I should say. And here's what I mean. I worked on, certainly I worked on federal housing policy when I was in Washington, D.C. And, we always, one of the things that at the federal government level, we wanted to incentivize construction of affordable housing. So, of course, we relied heavily upon the low income housing tax credit. We relied on all these kinds of things. But one of the things that I've noticed, especially when we went away from the terrible years of public housing, and I like to tell people the terrible years of public housing, we have to be honest about what that was. Those policies, when we created, quote, ghettos and all those kind of things, that was not housing policy. That was a segregation policy. How do you make sure you protect suburban development, suburban housing, and all that kind of stuff. So some people are afraid of that. But what I've been talking about, we've been using low income housing tax credit to incentivize private developers. And that's fine. We do need that kind of development because I think our housing problem writ large is a supply problem. And we just haven't been keeping up with that. But in recent years, well, I mean, for the last 20 or 30 years, we have been using low income housing tax credit to incentivize public housing. I mean, a private development of housing. And that's fine to the point, but it's only so far that private developers can go in affordability. They certainly cannot go to deeply affordable housing. In the meantime, we have not incentivized where I think we have a lot more work to do. And this is where the government funding comes in. How do we incentivize public and nonprofit development housing?
Mhm.
Entities that don't have to make a profit, entities that can own the property and keep a lid on the growth in rent because they don't need to make that kind of money. And this is where the incentives should come. For instance, what I would like to do when there is the next state bonding debate, I think the city should go to the legislature and say, we want a robust housing trust fund in the state bonding bill, 150 to 200 million dollars. And what we would do, because we do have a city trust fund, but it's more of a gap financing thing. But I want, one that really does work with some public developers and nonprofit like Beacon Housing, or Home Bonds, or Claire Housing even. These are public and nonprofit developers. They are doing it anyway. But they're not getting that much help, or they're giving gap funding but they
Yeah.
need access to capital. And so
Right.
we had a robust housing trust fund to help them. If we gave them access to city-owned property for little to no cost to really get them in there, I think we can begin to fill out the housing shortage and get that supply up. And then if you have public developers in there, we can lower the increase of cost for housing for everybody, because you'll have this real tranche of housing that is at a level that doesn't have an upward bid on the price for housing. By the way, if we continue to rely on the rate of private development, we run the risk of challenging our affordability. I know this to be true because this is what happened in Washington, D.C., and this is what happened in San Francisco. When I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1989, 1990, you could afford anything. And I have colleagues now who say they can't sell houses or condos unless they are prepared to move out of the area because they could never afford to purchase what they're living
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a
in.
lot of people in Minneapolis in that situation right now.
Right.
So, part of affordable housing conversation is always the homeless and the homeless encampments. So, what's sort of your strategy around those, and what approach would you take that's different from what's happening now?
Well, the first thing I would do, it is not a policy to sweep encampments. That is a response, and an immediate response to people who rightly are complaining about what those encampments bring. And I know you want to be respond, but I think people would be willing to hear, or it really work with the city on a response that will try to permanently prevent encampments from even rising up. And some of that comes with having to invest in the services that some of those people need. We know that some of the providers that we already work with are already connected to some of those people in those encampments. The issue is that they are stretched thin.
Yeah.
And we can't ask them to come in and help us with our problem if we are not willing to come forward with some dollars that is dedicated to paying those providers, making sure that they can get access to the people they already have in their case management system, and have a pathway to them out of the encampments. That is what I call it: depopulate the encampments. Don't sweep them before you've dealt with it. But that takes an investment. And
Hmm.
and from what I'm hearing and what I've seen, by the way, I've been asking this question: where is the city idea? Where's your plan? And there was never a plan forthcoming other than close them. That's not a plan. Again, that is a reaction, there's a response. But we really are going to have to put some skin in the game. And by the way, if we did that, that is, if we put some dollars in, we make sure that we are paying all those providers, substance use disorder counselors, mental health providers. We have already said we have bought your services. You're going to help us depopulate those encampments. Then we can prevail upon the county to begin to invest in beds specifically, getting us to help us to be populated. Right now, we just can't simply. I know what the city has been saying. The county should help us. Well, I'm all ready to beat up on the county, but we at least got to have something that we can point to and say, here's where we need your help specifically. And so if
Right.
we go ahead and invest, we go ahead and make sure those providers can get on the ground and depopulate some counties, then we can prevail upon the county to provide shelter beds and even some extra dollars. Help us do this. And here's that collaboration I'm talking about. It with the city and the county really standing up that foundation for responding to the encampments or depopulating the encampments, then we have what we need to go to the state. and say, look, here are some legislative changes we need to facilitate the work that we've stood up, and here are some dollars that we need to help facilitate that work. Right
Wow.
now, each of these entities are throwing what they can, and there's very little conversation, very little leadership from the city to kind of direct the way the county or the state is thinking about that. I know it's hard and it's unsexy. This is not the stuff made for press releases and press conferences and the visual. This is that hard, get in there and do the work and keep working this stuff so that we can make sure that we don't have those encampments filled up and that they won't pop up. And so that's the work we got to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are interested in some of that nuts and bolts type work that you're talking about that isn't that sexy, but makes the city function better,
Yeah.
as opposed to the press releases and things that you're talking about. Uh, and lastly, the crime was one of your tenants, as it
Yeah.
is for most people, and a lot of people associate the encampments with crime.
Yes. Yes.
But maybe you could just talk a little bit about how you would tackle crime in the city and how it relates to, say, community safety,
Mhm.
neighborhood safety department. I'm going to be interviewing Amanda Harrington tomorrow, who's in
Yeah.
charge of that group. So that department. So it'd be great to hear your plans for the spectrum that we're all looking for.
And that's a good question. Again, as co-chair of the mayor's community safety work group, this is some of the work that we did, and we spent a lot of time on the broader community safety matrix. It was we were that work group. We really came back to the mayor about how do you sort of fill out that community safety ecosystem in a way that really brings the most bang for the buck. Here's what I mean. We have been pressing the police department into areas that I know again that they are not suited for, or that they are better suited to do other things. And so that's why neighborhood safety should be operating at a different and higher level. That's why we need that accountability around. One of our recommendations, of course, into the mayor was to not only fill out the neighborhood safety office so that you can provide some best practices to violence interrupters, but you also specify, based upon the neighborhoods that they're operating in, some outcomes that we want to see. What are they equipped to do? Every neighborhood is not made the same. There are going to be some neighborhoods where there is a violence issue. There's some neighborhoods it's about property crime. But the issue is, how do we work with neighborhood safety, violence interrupters, and the police to really figure out what kind of outcomes that we need to be focused on, so that you can keep all the violence prevention is a great model. It is about community-based approaches to de-escalation, having people who know their community so they can get there before we have to call 911. And so, what we really do to make sure that those groups have the capacity and that they are meeting the needs of a particular neighborhood. That's one of the things that I think would really go a long way in helping us create the kind of safety we need that don't always would need a police response. I love what was going on with behavioral crisis response. That was one of our recommendations. What at the time it was a demonstration project, and we said get that behavioral crisis response throughout the city. And that's where the mayor and the city council have worked together. They've been doing that and going that direction, and that's very appropriate. The initial studies about that, both police and community said it was working wonderfully, and they loved it, and so let's go in that direction. But here's one thing that I am really concerned. I also was the facilitator of the community conversations, looking for the independent monitor for the court enforceable settlement agreement. We had four candidates for that. And one of the things, if you went and looked at the work they've done across the nation, you will see a mixed bag. There's some places where their consent decree or settlement agreements they worked on, they had great success. And there were some where it's completely, it's as if nothing ever happened. And there have been failures, and there have been complaints, community complaints about it. And I asked every one of those candidates, what do we need to make sure or give ourselves a good chance that our settlement agreement would work? And each of them said settlement agreements and consent decrees, they work when the mayor and the city leadership are consistently pushing, touting, and holding themselves accountable to it. And so, what I have been saying, I think the mayor, the current mayor, doesn't talk enough about it. And he'll tell you everything he'll tell all of the wonderful news, and he'll say, "But we've got more to do," but he never tells you explicitly what the more is. And so, if you weren't doing like me, one of those geeks who's looking at the effective law enforcement for America's reports, where I can see that yes, they have moved a little in this area, but for instance, they've written the policy of use of force, but the training hasn't happened yet, and they're a little bit behind. I
Hmm.
think you ought to be explicit so that you can be held accountable and everyone can be the city needs to know this. The residents need to know this is happening. Or same way with searches and seizures and chases. If the policy hasn't been written yet, you should say it.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
this is the thing we've got to do. And the reason you need to do that, because if you listen to the mayor, all you're going to hear is I think the thing he's like to say is we've gone further in meeting the things that we need to do than any other consent agreement. Oh, that's wonderful. But we didn't hear where do we need to go. So if someone walked away from that, they would assume like, oh, it's all going swimmingly. But there are some signs there that there are things that we've got to keep our finger on the pulse and we've got to be vigilant about. We've got to be real careful because we know it said in that report there are some resistances in the rank and file.
Hmm.
And so what we need is the mayor to say, you know what, we're going there. I understand the chief of police has to be, has to walk a line, but the political leadership, look, we got to be held accountable in a different way. And so we've
Right.
got to be out front on that. And that to me is where we can begin, one, to make sure that all of those changes that we learn in the pattern and practice investigation are actually addressed, that the outcomes that we agree to in the settlement agreement are embedded and has truly reformed the police. And then we can begin to build trust again, and not only just us trusting the police, but that the police trust that we're not going to press them into areas that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be.
Right. So where do you stand on just the number, the flat out numbers, when you the concept of like them trusting us and this improving trust made me think about the fact I know they're touting that we finally made it over 600 officers for the first time, and
Mhm.
I'm not exactly sure how many years, but do you feel like we have enough officers? Do we need more? Do we need to change how we're recruiting them? Like, what's the right mix?
Well, I'm happy. And I give credit where credit's due. I'm happy that the mayor has listened to us in our recommendation about recruitment. One of our major recommendations in recruitment was that they really go into a broader way, a broader sort of recruitment effort. That is, typically what was going on is that police departments were going to the military, former military or former law enforcement, and we said no. Really push on the non-traditional pathways to the police academy into police work, and that would be go make sure that you are working with EMS, teachers, social workers, people, just people in the city who would
Mhm.
like to try this, go that route. And I think they've been doing a better job at that. And that is important because if you have those non-traditional pathways, just think about it. If everybody you recruit either comes from the military or from another law enforcement agency, there's a certain kind of approach that you're getting. But what if we had more people who are in, say, EMS or firefighters? My husband's father went from being a firefighter to a police officer. just a broader sort of experience in the community, and largely from the place that they lived. That gives you a broader mix of people who can change the department from within with different experiences. But also, look, we do need to get the coverage. We need the response times to 911 to go down, and that is directly related to how many officers we have. And so,
Well, and sorry to jump in there,
no,
but I mean that came up recently in some discussions I've seen, particularly around the third precinct, because the precinct house is downtown. It's a very large
yes.
area, so until they get that community safety center online, it doesn't. I'm not sure how they're going to get the response times down.
Right, right,
Um,
and exactly, and so we need police. And look, see, my concern, Terry, with even that about the third precinct, again, I want to be careful because I'm not I've not played a role in I'm not in a position to be in the direct conversations that the city council, the mayor, and the people are have, the people who are involved, the police are having about this. But I am really worried that this is an example of what I mean about the lack of cooperation and collaboration in governing. There's no reason that I just wonder what is the reason that you could not work together to figure out how to do that. I'm afraid. And I'm trying to be nice, and maybe I shouldn't, but I'm really concerned that this is a lot of playing politics for political advantage.
mhm.
And this is the wrong time to be doing that. This is the kind of cynicism that I think just drives people to distraction. Like, what is going on? And then they lack trust. By the way, the reason that is so important is because that is why I think we have now another Trump term, because I think for so long people were just gotten so fed up and tuned out and with the cynicism that they could not hear the threat of what another term would be. And so I'm concerned that, right now I'm hopeful because everybody I talk to, this is the great beauty of it, Terry. Everybody I get out there and talk to, what I think holds us in good stead is that people in Minneapolis are hopeful that we can do better. They
Yes.
haven't lost hope yet. They still believe. And while they still believe, I want to give them, I want to lean into that hope. I want to lean into that trust that they are trying to have. And so when you see what happens in third precinct, that's the very thing that makes people wonder, like, are you really going to do this? Can I trust what you're saying? And so I think this is what's concerned about playing politics with this kind of stuff, because it gives you political advantage, or you're playing to a certain constituency because it gives you some advantage. We've got to stop that stuff and get to some real work here. And like I said, we have a chance to do it, but that is going to run out if we don't get serious about doing what we're doing.
So my next question is kind of a tricky one. Uh, I just thought maybe you could share something that about yourself, a little bit more personal, like a hobby or personal interest or some community involvement that you think kind of gives residents a little bit bigger picture of who Dr. DeWayne Davis is.
That's a good question. And I'm going to feel so weird. Some of it I'm going to feel weird. Anyway, um, it's very much what the way I am now is very connected to how, in so many ways, my family made sure that the world became big for me, and it's something I can't get away from. So, my family helped me counter, I think, a terrible school system, and the ways that a bad school system could you know ruin your chances for success in your life. It was community theater and
Okay.
the public library.
Two
So
good things.
yes, those are the things that saved me and broadened the world in just such a profound way for me. So even now, um, there are a couple of things that I think people should know. One, my husband and I are ridiculously stereotypically theater queens.
Okay.
We love theater and we sing theater, show tunes. It's all a part of what we do. But another thing is, um, I love the libraries and I take walks in the summer and I take routes where I can go to the little free libraries to look into the books. And
Okay.
it is my that's what I if you ever see me walking around, I'm gonna route well, I'm gonna try to remember where I saw the little free libraries and I go and visit. Sometimes I don't even take a book or anything. Sometimes I find some treasures that I want to read. But that is the beauty and expansiveness that I put into my life. It is what animates our home, theater and books and music and art. It's what I loved about, really loved about my time at Plymouth Church. You know, Plymouth has an art gallery. We have a performance theater. We have the great Philip Brunel, who founded Vocal Essence, is our organist and choir master. And so, surrounded by the beauty of art, music, and theater, that is the way I cope with life, deal with life, live life.
Well, those are good ways. This might be hard to answer off the cuff, but when you go to stock a little library, where are a couple of the books that you would put in there that you'd like people to read?
I have several copies of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time.
Okay.
So that's a book also that when I have communicated with people in prison, I try to send those copies. Interesting thing too, those are sometimes the book that prisons send back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
They
so
don't-
it tells you how it's also a testament to how powerful those that book is. So
Well,
the
I
best,
haven't read it, so I'm gonna
yeah.
have to look it up.
Yes.
Uh,
And another one that I haven't done it as much, but I do really do love To Kill a Mockingbird, and I think I have several copies of that. But I sometimes I put that in there.
so so we can wind it up here. Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you wanted to talk about, or any questions we didn't get to that you think people should hear?
Well, I'll say this. There is a I think there's a well, I put it this way. I think there's something that I think we really have to remind ourselves here. And I just think it's worth saying. And I've said it before. And sometimes I think people say I'm being a little too academic about it. But I don't, we really have to think about our city in a different way now that uh, now that we have that administration in Washington D.C. And the reason I say that we have to think about it in a different way. Certainly, we're thinking about our prospects, our life, our challenges, and how we're going to address them. But I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that the turn that our nation is taking, we are going to need shining examples of democracy thriving and continuing regardless of what is happening. And I think Minneapolis is the city that can do that. I really do. And I want people to hear me when I say that because if we do it the way that I know we've done in the past, the reason Minneapolis is no longer known as Murderapolis, because when we got that moniker, this city came together and said, we're going to shift and work together to make sure that we are not that. We didn't do that quick or well enough after George Floyd was murdered. But right now, given where the nation is going, based upon what Washington is doing, we get to, I think, not only address our challenges by being a true and energetic and determined democracy, but I think we can be an example that other cities can look to get their sea legs and to get their determination to stand up and be a laboratory of democracy. And if we do that, we can arrest our slide into illiberalism and autocracy in a way that we don't like. And so we, in this way, this is somewhat, some of this is impact of ministry. How do you model the life you want the world to see? I think Minneapolis is in that position. I think we're uniquely situated to do it. We have an abundance of riches in people, ideas, and creativity, and so we've got to get that going. And so don't let the fighting between the mayor and the city council dissuade you or throw you into throes of desperation and cynicism. Look to me if you can, and hear me when I say we can do better than this. We deserve better, and we got it. We can do this, and I want to help us do it.
Before I let you go, I have to ask a question that many of the Hill and Lake Press readers are interested in, and many people in the city. How do we get Uptown going again? You mentioned earlier, which I thought was an interesting concept of like kind of almost like neighborhood development where we have a focus around small businesses and
Yeah.
stuff. So how does that maybe apply to Uptown, and what's your plan there?
So a couple of things. I had the opportunity to talk to a small business in Uptown that opened just last year, and just asked about the experience. What was it like to do that? What was the atmosphere like? What was And there were some things that really bothered me. The first thing was that this business owner got very little help from the city when they needed it.
Hmm.
That it just was not being able to talk to the right people, not being able to get where they needed to get. And so even the things that they needed to know around some licensing and permitting, they learned from their contractor,
Oh, yeah.
which great that they found the right contractor. But and so one of the things that I really want to be sure when I become mayor, I want to bring in somebody, some kind of ombuds person or some kind of person to really look at how do we organize that office, small business office, in a way that actually is value added and facilitative of small business and entrepreneurship. That's the first thing. Let's take out the barriers to doing things. Let's get this such that people, the entrepreneurialism is incentivized. Certainly we have some programs for that, but to make sure that they can actually get the work done, get the information they need, and not be held up. Because by the way, for some people, time is critical. If you've got
Yeah.
capital that you're trying to get money, it's critical to doing it. So that's the first. The second thing, um, I also think we need to expand how we talk to larger corporations, especially when we try to incentivize how they're going to show up in our city. And what I mean by that is we really do need to be in conversation, especially when we provide incentives for businesses to come here and we really try to get them here. We also should try to negotiate commitments to including small business in their vendor networks and in their supply chains. I mean, we really should be a little bit more intentional and clear about how that can help us do some of that work. And then Uptown's experience brought in something that I think we have really, all governments should be thinking more critically about this. We really, especially when we're going to do major infrastructure projects like that, we need in our planning to build in some anti displacement money. We just are going to have to do that. We really going to have to be looking after small businesses, and certainly we're going to be looking out for residents who we just got to do that. And by the way, the reason I say we need to do that, one of the most powerful and impressive and effective anti-displacement program was the federal government's response to COVID shutdowns. The Paycheck Protection Program, the dollars in your pockets, that's anti-displacement, and it worked. It's what the county is doing, and the Met Council are now doing with the extension of the Blue Line here in Northside.
Right.
Really intentionally thinking about the impact on small business and on residents. And so for our small business, we also need to be doing this kind of protective and anti-displacement work to make sure we're not interfering with businesses that are successful and doing well. So with all of that working together, what I'm really proposing here is that we really do continue to have our small business network an ongoing critical part of how we think about business writ large, how we think about neighborhoods, how do we even think about investing in neighborhoods. That's critically important here in the North Side. We just have we see the neglect over here. Uh, Uptown's problem, again, I think had to do with infrastructure and again, cost, cost, both cost of rents, cost of bill. But these are some of the things that we need to be looking at and always have current in our mind and in our thinking so that we can leverage the city's zoning and revenue generating power to be of some help to entrepreneurs and for small business. And so I think that's what we go forward doing, that this become just front and center, how we even think about the way we organize, neighborhoods, how we're thinking about neighborhoods. Certainly we think about neighborhoods in terms of residents, but really be thinking about how we have these thriving, vibrant commercial zones all over the place, and we're incentivizing it, supporting it, and protecting it.
Have you had a time to think through? I know some people are advocating for a business improvement district in Uptown, something similar to what's going on in downtown. Do you think that's a good start for Uptown, or is that just one option? Where do you?
I'm open to that. I'm open to that option as one option. The only thing that I would want that option to do, what I would want that to be. Sometimes I get concerned that um, when you do those kinds of things, we put the thumb on the scales for certain types of businesses, and we don't we're not open to all of the ways of that entrepreneurs show up and make things. By the way, that's the thing that we did to ourselves downtown. One of the things I've said that, I ask people all the time, do you remember when there used to be car dealerships downtown? And people say, oh, yeah, I remember that. And then, of course, there was a shift in the way economies work. And so downtown, these car dealerships, they wanted to go out into the suburbs and have more space and all that kind of. And so then we began to rely only on commercial office space and stop being sort of creative and imaginative about what downtown could be and what kinds of businesses could go in there. So I'm open to all these kind of business development, corporate corporations, and all kind of things. That's great. But what I would always invite people to do is let's not sort of put the thumb on the scale for a certain type of business, or let's really incentivize entrepreneurialism, respond to those ideas, really engage in the creativity and imagination. By the way, I think to me that's one of the things that is we're starting to figure out with the cannabis industry. We had to get in gear to begin to think about what these, and it's good that we kind of we were able to, so I think, move a little bit faster. But I want us to be open to that kind of entrepreneurialism where we're not sort of like picking winners and choose, or this is the kind of place that we want, and certainly not try to recreate what we had. I know that's a temptation. Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
so
that's true. I mean, Uptown's never going to look like it looked 30, 40 years ago. And so we have to be open to what
right.
it's going to look like now.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Be really, really incentivize that kind of creative, imaginative thinking, and by the way, I think to a certain extent, there's some areas that I think North Loop did that very well. I mean, that was sort of an open canvas for a while, and so there was a lot of ways to think about what that could be,
Hmm.
and even now that's thriving. So I want to keep that kind of openness and creativity there for other places too.
All right, great. Thank you.
Mhm.